Okay, well, good, thank you. So I'll just pick up from where I was left off, and I was just expanding the phrase innovation to put disciplined in front of it, disciplined innovation. There may be different ways that we can talk about this, and I just wanted to add that as one of the ways we should be talking about innovation in this forum. And to try and define that, I think it's evidence-informed, it's kind of values or democratically rooted, thinking about equity coming at the heart of that, and also about risk-aware, conscious of the potential unintended consequences. So I just wanted to kind of add that to our thinking about when we talk about education innovation. And actually thinking about disciplined innovation is what led us at UNICEF to work with Tom and his colleagues, and our colleagues in Aga Khan, to explore issues of using technology to support education. Because what we're finding in the region is that there were a lot of the discipline around innovation or with using technology for learning was not well rooted. There were mistakes being made, there's new partnerships being built with big tech companies who are coming with new ideas and new partnerships and new ways of wanting to work, with our traditional partners of government and civil society being perhaps a bit blindsided and wowed by the technology. And so a whole range of challenges around matching the entry of and the promise of technology with our ambitions of ensuring that all children access high quality education that leads to quality learning outcomes. And mistakes were being made along the way. At the regional office, we're kind of a resource for our country offices where the programs work. They're coming to us and we don't necessarily have the answers. And so that's very much the context that we were working in. I wonder if we can get to the next slide. What we did have, and UNICEF developed these, but now they were kind of global good, and many, I don't know if people have heard of the Principles for Digital Development. Most UN global organisations, including some foundations like Gates, have signed up to these as principles for digital development. So they're not just related to education, but across all areas. And you could go to the website to get a bit more information about these different principles. I'm not going to go into detail in this. But we have these principles, but what we found that they were necessary but not sufficient to help guide us think about what it means to effectively think about education innovation in the context of technology. So if I can just go to the next slide. And so therefore put one back with all the logos. So therefore we commissioned a consortium of Innovation Unit, Aga Khan Education Services, and Aga Khan Foundation to help us think through, and us being, I'm from the Eastern and Southern Africa region, but with our Western Central Africa region, so across the Sub-Saharan Africa region, to think about ICT for learning. And so let me stop there and then perhaps hand over to Tom to talk a bit about, okay, so what did we learn from looking into these questions?
Great, thank you, Shiraz. I'll just give a brief introduction to who I am and what Innovation Unit do. So I've been working in and around innovation in education for the last 5 years, and that's been with an organisation called Innovation Unit, which is a not-for-profit social enterprise that really works with partners to create and grow new solutions to complex social problems. And we do that all in pursuit of what we describe as thriving societies. That's not surviving, it's just not just getting by, it's thriving. We break that down into working with families, communities and young people to support them to be a part of the change and to thrive within it. And it leads us into all different spaces. So we work a lot in health and social care, we work a lot in children's social care and kind of community regeneration, but also in schooling and learning, and that's actually where our kind of heartlands lie, very much in the same context as Shiraz was talking about, the kind of noughties in the UK. Education innovation was a buzzword, not so much now, which is what led us to work much more internationally. And we've now got offices in Australia and New Zealand, and we've done work in the US and Singapore. So we've learned a lot over that period of time. And that brought us to this opportunity to work with colleagues at UNICEF Sub-Saharan Africa and Aga Khan to really look at specific focus on ICT for learning. And what we wanted to do was recognise that there is a nascent evidence base around ICT for learning and its impact on how you can raise learning outcomes. And we really wanted to recognise that, but also recognise that there was a big effort, as was said this morning, to talk about and explore what works for who, when, how in education innovation. In particular, what works in education technologies, what we're calling ICT for learning. So we looked at the evidence base as it existed. We also looked at pulling lessons learned from successes and failures on the continent of Africa, but also systems internationally. And what we've done is try to pull together some, I guess, how-to insights or key considerations, which we think can really help complement the What Works agenda and the kind of emerging evidence base. And these are essentially lessons learned, things that we think are really important in the exec sum that you've got. There's a longer list. But really we wanted to pull out some what we think are slightly more kind of advances in the thinking. We know that there are considerations around infrastructure, resources, the risks around ICT for learning, young people becoming exposed to the digital world. But these feel like some important ones to recognise as well in the broader context of this conversation. So I'm just going to quickly kind of fly through these and hopefully kind of use them as stimulus for a conversation. But one thing that our research really recognised is that often initiatives around ICT for learning didn't really have an obvious or kind of well-defined purpose, which is surprising. It feels really obvious. But that kind of discipline around what technology was trying to achieve in classrooms and in learning more broadly was often absent or ill-defined. The next one, again, teacher capability. It's often been talked about in a technical sense of how to use the technology. But actually what we found over the years and the kind of scars on teachers' backs and policymakers' backs is that what we really need to do is integrate the technical capabilities with the pedagogical capabilities and the actual organising of learning in classrooms and how technology can be a tool within those teaching and learning practices. So that role of integrating technology, there's a kind of lack of capability in that we think is really important that needs to be kind of deliberately focused on. The third one that we think is really interesting is this idea of having a kind of clear strategy, a deliberate strategy for implementation and change. And that's not just really great programming design around ICT for learning programs, but actually understanding how the use of ICT for learning can be integrated or kind of be supported by existing improvement and change strategies within schools or within systems. Unless those two are aligned or kind of interwoven, these initiatives often get tangled and aren't effective in either of their objectives. The fourth one that we think is an interesting one, especially from the perspective of UNICEF, is how can governments provide not just a clear vision and policy platform for ICT for learning, but also how can they foster innovation from the bottom up, and how can they support local organisations or institutions or providers to help them to adapt some of these technologies that suit the context that they're working in and the problems they're trying to solve. So there's a kind of top-down, bottom-up balancing act that we think is a really important thing to pay attention to. And the final one, which feels really interesting for this discussion in particular, is one around what is the role of students and teachers in ICT for learning. We know that it's becoming much more popular to talk about teachers as co-designers of technology solutions in education. But actually we think that from our research you need to go further and talk about them as co-implementers. So what is their role in understanding how that technology integrates with the broader kind of learning vision in a school, or kind of how is their teaching practice being adapted to solve some of the problems that they themselves recognise day to day. So really understanding teachers as active adopters and adapters of ICT for learning and innovation more broadly felt like a really important thing to recognise. So we, just to give a bit of texture to this, we have obviously an evidence base around the kind of literature that exists. We also had some case studies both at a system level, so this is Singapore's case study. I won't go into any depth, but they're on their 4th master technology plan, but really investing in the capabilities of their teachers, really understanding how to best share practice and create the conditions for that enabling kind of environment where teachers are sharing their practice with one another. Similarly, there's a kind of programmatic example with our colleagues at Aga Khan Foundation working with Dubai Cares, really working with a breadth of players, so not just the government, but also providers of hardware and digital content, but also those that are providing professional development, really to fuse all these worlds together in kind of better harmony towards a kind of shared goal and outcome. And they also developed a mobile app that again facilitated that kind of adaptation of innovation and the kind of sharing of best practices.
So yeah, let me just take one more minute from our time to just kind of finish up to kind of say, okay, so we've done this piece of work with our colleagues, and it's led to some questions and some things that we need to kind of refocus and focus harder on. So let me just say a little bit about that, and perhaps then kind of finish with some questions that can inform the discussion later. Clearly what we've been told, and it's not necessarily rocket science, but it's worth reminding that we have learned that innovation in education, and particularly technologically shaped or influenced innovation in education, needs to be rooted in the education priorities at hand, with the education stakeholders at the heart of it. And I think what we'll get from this, and we hope to publish the full report in the next month, and do look out for that. This will give us some of the tools that build on our kind of core digital principles that really give us the tools to be able to do this with partners, to really think about how we think about innovation and technologically informed innovation. But second, then, connecting to the question that Sehr and Jody raised for us to discuss here is there's some questions that kind of raised that still need further work, I think. One is around kind of community-led innovation. What does it really look like to help teachers to be leading change? And I think in technology, we've got many examples of teachers being consulted, teachers being involved at some point. I mean, many edtech firms will have teachers on their staff roles, but that's not quite teacher agency in the way that Tom was talking about. So what's that shift that might need to happen, and how can all partners, from partners in San Francisco to donors in New York and London, and to stakeholders on the ground, really kind of make sense of that? Coming back to the phase of disciplined innovation, to what degree do we need to start kind of expanding that to think about when we're implementing innovative interventions, that framework that I kind of put out there about it being evidence-informed, democratically rooted, and risk-aware, aware of the unintended consequences? To what degree have we got the frameworks to make sure that disciplined innovation happens? And then also there's a question for me about when UNICEF is interested in working with partners and governments and civil societies to eventually achieve scale, national transformation, national change. And to what degree do we need to think about some of the building blocks? And it was a question that I raised in one of the sessions yesterday, the building blocks that need to be put in place before kind of quality innovation can actually happen. And with technology, we do need to get some basics right around not only technological infrastructure, but the core of the education provision at hand, teachers trained, turning up, books in place, core things, kids attending, and so on and so forth, before we can expect the kind of quality innovation that we might want that we hope for. So let me stop there.
Thank you.
Nope.
Oh,
Okay.
oh,
No.
okay.
I thought we were going slideless unless. Okay.
Well, you can go slideless. Go
Yeah,
for
it was optional.
It was
Yeah,
optional.
yeah.
Cool.
We just
taking
put a
the
limit
option
to the
not
slides.
slides. Yeah, exactly. Sorry guys. Yeah, I don't have fancy slides for you to follow. It's easier just to share experiences verbally. So my name is Tom Parry. I lead an organisation called Instill Education, as I said, we're based in Johannesburg. We're a teacher training organisation trying to become a private higher education institution. So essentially, we want to completely reinvent the way that pre- and in-service teacher training is delivered on the continent. I say trying because we're still deep in the accreditation process for the South African government. Had our second anniversary the other day, it was great. Hopefully getting an outcome in August, fingers crossed, but if not, then we'll resubmit and we'll be back in the game next year, we hope. What we're doing in the meantime is delivering in-service programs, so working with a whole range of schools, public, non-profit, locally private, expensive private, the whole lot, to basically design and test an education model that works effectively and delivers measurable outcomes. So the certain amount of what I'm going to say is going to very much support what Shiraz and Tom have already said. But I think I also want to approach it from the extremely on-the-ground practical perspective that we have, having spent the last 3 or so years doing this work and really slogging it out on the ground. I'm sure these guys have done plenty of slogging, but like, we're sitting at ground level, working with the difficulties face-to-face on a daily basis. So there are a couple of different angles that I wanted to kind of bring to the fore here in terms of what we think about when we're doing our design process and some of the bigger problems that we're facing. And several of these things were brought up in the other teacher training discussion yesterday, but I think they're worth repeating. So the first is around credentialing. So for teachers across the continent, obviously getting a credential that allows you to teach in a classroom is incredibly important. But I think what we're finding is that the credentialing systems are completely unfit for purpose. So currently, in most countries on the continent, you have to have some kind of university degree or at least a diploma in order to teach in a classroom. For the vast majority of teachers, these institutions are unaffordable, they're inaccessible, and they're delivering a qualification which isn't really meeting the teacher where they are at. Right? Too many teachers do not have the fundamental literacy and numeracy skills, for example, to work at a university level. And universities, I speak specifically from the South African context, but I do believe it's relevant in most other contexts as well. In South Africa, universities and academics do not want to move their standards at all. And they're therefore pitching drastically over the heads of the vast majority of teachers going into these systems. So most teachers who are currently studying or recently graduated many of them are functionally illiterate, and they're going into these degree programs and they're being pitched this extremely theoretical academic degree level training, and it is going completely over their heads. And universities are dogmatically getting through these programs, delivering awful results, continuously having to move the goalposts so that teachers are getting through and getting credentialed, and then putting these completely untrained teachers into the classroom. Teachers are just not ready to teach a lesson the moment they step out of even a 4-year degree. And it just blows my mind that you can spend 4 years in a degree, run up a huge debt, and be completely unprepared for your job. It's just the whole thing seems completely insane to me. The other piece around this is around the kind of divide between pre-service and in-service. So you get your pre-service qualification, you then go into the classroom, and there really is no in-service training to speak of that's reaching the vast majority of teachers. So when we're designing programs, pre-service is supposed to be sort of front-loading education for teachers. They're then being dropped into a classroom. If they're getting any in-service training, it's not based on any sound andragogical principles. It doesn't link in any way with the training that they've done at university. It's a complete waste of time and money for the most part. Results, I mean, if there is any which is conducted, which there for the most part isn't, it's just showing that there is no improvement at all in the performance of teachers. I think this is a global issue. I think increasingly we're seeing the amount of money that's being spent on in-service training, and actually in terms of particularly learner outcomes, there's almost no number. Right? There's sort of hundreds of millions, billions of dollars being spent for no improvement at all. So I think we are obviously having to work within the system, so we're designing programs that will be initially one-year PGCEs, will also look at BEds and diplomas and everything else. But I think that the broader conversation needs to be around how do we get rid of these very northern hemisphere / Western paradigms around what it means to be a credentialed teacher? How do we actually design something which is fit for purpose, which is getting teachers to a standard that is enabling them to deliver a lesson with an objective, a learning outcome that is actually, that is providing at least some kind of education to kids. At the moment, we've got teachers who aren't credentialed, who are technically illegal, or who are credentialed, and the quality of education is still fundamentally the same. So we need to find a way that's speeding up this process, taking training to the teachers in these harder to reach places. Technology is going to play a part of that. We'll get onto that in a bit. But I think there needs to be a collective discussion around what does a more effective credentialing system look like. Then diving into, I think, this idea of meeting teachers where they're at. There's obviously a huge range of teaching abilities and contexts on the continent. And again, we see in South Africa we have one standard of education for teachers, and yet you're talking about teachers in private schools which are comparable to any private school around the world, all the way down to the most rural schools, where teachers, as I said, are kind of functionally illiterate and aren't getting any of the kind of support that they need to really perform their jobs. I mean, in Kaduna State in Nigeria, it's a story I've had a few people talking about. 25,000 teachers just lost their jobs because they're primary school teachers because they are illiterate. So Kaduna State is in the process of hiring 25,000 teachers. Now, we need to find a way, someone needs to find a way of being able to train these 25,000 teachers, because I don't think there are any institutions in Nigeria that know how to do it. So like, how do we tackle this scale of problem, this kind of problem? In South Africa, a very, very huge problem is content knowledge. Again, I think this is a problem that's experienced to greater or less extent in other countries. South African teachers typically don't know the content they're teaching, even at a grade 6 level. I think it's 70-something% of teachers cannot pass a grade 6 exam. It's incredibly hard to, if your teacher doesn't know the content, to actually get them to teach at all, because you have to find a way somehow of blending together the pedagogical training with the content knowledge, and how do you teach all of those things whilst the teacher is doing a full-time job and earning the same typically meager wage that the teachers pay. And I think that this is something that we have to work on. So in terms of the technology piece, we have looked at a lot of different platforms and models, and are yet to be convinced that there is a standalone technology platform that can effectively train teachers. There are definitely ways of providing content to teachers, and that is undoubtedly useful. So we've seen plenty of examples where teachers are provided some content knowledge that they can either do themselves, which improves their knowledge over time, or gives them content that they can lift to put into their lessons. Either improves the quality of the lessons and is definitely a benefit. However, I don't think we're yet in a place, and I don't think we will be for a while, where you can remove that human element. Whatever we design has to be at least a blended model where there is some human interaction that supports teachers to actually implement things that they're taught, supports them to learn new knowledge, apply it in their lessons, make sure it's ingrained, make sure it's learned properly to fidelity. And without that, we're not going to see the quality of teaching improving. So another thing that we think about a lot is practicality. We feel that there's a lot of training that's out there that provides knowledge to teachers. Teachers mostly now have access to the internet. Certainly in South Africa, they mostly have access to the internet, they have access to all this content, but actually it's not the content, it's not the knowledge that's the problem, it's the implementation. It's this change from knowledge through to behavioral change, and actually ingraining practices in teachers' classroom routines, making sure that things are ingrained and are consistently applied. So we talk about a 10-20-70 model, which I think lots of training organizations talk about. The 10% is what's taking place in a facilitated session or through the kind of interaction with knowledge. 20% is the social learning, so interaction with peers, and then 70% is how that teacher is then supported to make sure that the knowledge or the technique is being implemented in the classroom. So we're finding in our programs that the most impactful part of the program is not just a facilitated session. I don't think it's actually even it's the observations and the coaching that happens afterwards. So if a teacher is being consistently observed and coached, and this is being shown, there's a study, randomized control trial that's being done at the moment called the Early Grade Reading Study in Northwest Province in South Africa, and they were comparing, forgive me if I've got one of the elements wrong, lesson plans or resources for teachers, coaching and observations, and I think some kind of community or parental engagement with the school. And they were saying that far and away the most impactful component is the coaching that's taking place, and that is an experienced coach, so someone with classroom experience visiting that teacher, ideally on a monthly basis, but if not on a termly basis, giving them individual feedback and supporting them to improve their teaching. Now, that helps teachers on so many different levels, gives them confidence, gives them support, it gives them individualized feedback that they can improve, and that is, again, it's an anathema to most teachers. There is not enough of this ongoing support in the classrooms. I think part of that problem, leading on from this idea of coaches, is that in South Africa, for example, coaching observations are not part of any teaching program, like certainly not on the pre-service stage. So when a student teacher is doing their pre-service degree and they go on their practicum, their kind of practical section, which is typically 8 to 12 weeks a year, they are lucky if they get one observation. Lucky. And I don't think those observers are typically that qualified. They should be getting 3 or 4, and they should be getting support in schools. But we have to be realistic that is not the case. So most teachers are getting into the classroom having never been coached. They don't know what it's like to be observed. They feel incredibly threatened when people come into their classrooms. And until we break that, then I think we're never going to see teaching quality improve. Teachers need to be comfortable with people coming in to support them rather than feeling judged. It means there is also a lack of qualified teacher developers. There are people who are doing teacher training. I think typically the programs we see don't have that much basis in modern research. They're delivering very similar content through facilitated sessions, and then that's it. Nothing more is really said about it. There's never any follow-up, there's never any kind of embedding of that knowledge and support. So I think as practitioners, as people thinking about this, we need to think about how in the long term we are developing a body of competent teacher developers on the ground, because until we have that, we can't keep parachuting people in or interventions in, be that technology-based or anything else, until you have a really strong body of competent teacher developers who understand the context, who've been through the classroom, who can pass these skills on. So I think that has to be a very long-term project for all of us collectively. I think this is incumbent to really think through about how we're developing this level of capacity, and how do we make sure that once we're gone and we're not doing anything, what are we leaving behind? How's my timing going? Nearly there, okay. Yes, I mean, another thing that we think about a lot is the indigenization, and in South Africa this is something that gets spoken about a lot, indigenization of materials. So we're taking sort of frameworks that are developed elsewhere in the world and contextualizing them for South African classrooms. And often we'll hear, guys, you're not indigenizing your content. Now, we work incredibly hard to make sure that everything we're delivering in the classroom is designed and delivered by South African teachers and facilitators, and I think that's the right way to go about it. There are certain things, though, that at the moment we're not able to indigenize, if that's the right word. So, for example, we do a lot with videos. We do very specific techniques, we back those up with videos so the teachers can see exactly what's being implemented in the classroom, and more often than not, we have to use a US or a UK open source video, because we just don't have video libraries of African teachers doing the kinds of techniques that we're looking to train. So we're looking to develop our own video libraries. Obviously that's relatively resource intensive and not something we're able to prioritize at the moment, but making sure that collectively, again, we're building resource libraries that teachers can then access and organizations can access. Because if there are resources that are available that have been designed and iterated with African teachers, then I think that we can at least improve the quality of a lot of things that's taking place. So for example, with the video library we're looking to create, we want to create an open source video library because we believe that this can help teachers all over the continent and can hopefully improve the quality of other programs taking place. To Shiraz's point around community-led innovation, we've also, this isn't something we have unfortunately had the time or the kind of funders to work with to do, but there are some very interesting models that are taking a very long-term approach to community development around schools. And I think that, as Shiraz was saying, like this idea of developing communities so that the community is supporting the school, the teachers feel valued, you're improving the status of teachers within the community is, again, an incredibly important part of any interventions we're designing being successful. So if there are ICT interventions, for example, teachers have to be in the right mind space to want to engage with these programs and to be able to engage with these programs. And I think that being supported by the community is definitely a big part towards that. So I think there's a large piece of work that needs to be done with schools before we even get into the kind of hard skills and the teacher development process. And I think often the problem with this is it takes a very long time. It's not sexy at all. There's actually nothing taking place. And I was talking to someone in South Africa who's been doing this for about a decade, and she was saying the best lesson that she had was that the less she did, the more took place. Like, she came in with all these ideas and what needed to take place, and she realized that all she needed to do was be there to try and facilitate the discussion, and the more she facilitated the discussion, the more the communities engaged and were there to actually support the school in the longer term. So this idea of kind of being there, being present, showing support for the school and the community and the teachers is very important, but actually there can and possibly should be this period of just building that groundswell of support to make sure that as and when the more technical interventions take place, there is an environment in which these things can take root. And we found this, we're working in township schools around Cape Town. These communities are traumatized, and it is very difficult. I mean, so here we sort of turn up and we're suddenly delivering these very intensive programs to teachers after school, and the first 6 months were falling on deaf ears because they just weren't ready for us to be there. And yeah, I mean, I think this is something that organisations will continue to struggle with. But I mean, I think we need to be very realistic about the environments in which we're working often and making sure that teachers are fine. Cool, guys, that's everything.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We're running
I'll do my best.
Well, you still have fully your time to present.
I'll try to keep it tight. How are we doing on energy? Do you really need a stretch or anything?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if you want a banana dance. We can.
Yeah.
Got it. So I actually have I have a whole library of energizers if we have time for them. So actually, related to that, 10 years ago, I moved to South Africa and was overseeing research and monitoring and evaluation for a nonprofit there that does HIV prevention, education, and life skills education. And I learned a lot through that time. And basically, when I stepped into that role, we were about to go from 5,000 kids a year to 50,000 kids a year in South Africa. And our data systems were really not set up to manage that. We had basically paper to Excel to another Excel, and then one person who managed the monster Excel. And I was given the jump drive that was the monster Excel and everything underneath. And overnight they kind of said, okay, you're now in charge of this. And I was like, okay, now what? And one of the things that we did that I think was really important was we got out to the field and just listened. We went and talked to the teachers, the facilitators that were running this program, and just understood from their perspective what's challenging, what are the pain points with this process, what needs to be different, what needs to change, and then from there we built on existing technologies. We leveraged existing platforms to put together a stronger system, and we democratized data within the organization. Essentially built out one of the first Salesforce-based monitoring evaluation systems that was kicking out dashboards to everybody in the organization, from the facilitators to the staff. And that was just really a game changer. That's sort of where Vera grew out of this nonprofit over the years. So as other organizations started coming to us and saying, hey, this is exactly what we need, we want to better track and manage our data, we started helping out other organizations and learning from every project that we've done. Now we've worked with over 250 organizations in 50 countries, and we've got 25, 60 people around the globe. So I can kind of bring a technology solution provider lens to this conversation. I have a few other hats I can put on if they're useful as like a researcher and you know as just a practitioner. But I've been asked to kind of do a bit of a deep dive into a project we've been doing with the Kaufman Foundation, which is closely connected to Schools 2030. And basically, the same ethos that we started with back in South Africa, creating kind of a strong data management backbone, but also making sure that it's really teacher driven, and that any innovation that's coming is actually really coming from from need, and really coming from and shaped by the teachers. So basically we'll cover that, and then I'll step back and cover a couple of lessons learned over the years. So go to the next one. So this is the process that we follow. So Promise 3, you'll hear more about the what and the why of Promise 3 this afternoon. In the plenary, we're going to dig in here just to the how. So how do we kind of get to this app? And so this is the process that we followed over the course of about a little over a year, to be honest. And I think that one thing to consider and think about is as you're taking a teacher-centered design, a human-centered design approach, and working with your end users to shape the end tool that you might be building or implementing. It takes a long time, and you really need to factor in that design time into any kind of implementation. If you kind of go into this with a mindset of, hey, we're going to have a tool ready to roll out in 6 months, and we're just going to be able to roll it out straight away, I think often we just see organizations underestimate the amount of design time needed, discovery time needed, and then also underestimate the change management challenges as our colleagues at UNICEF were talking about before. So this is what we did. We did 24, we worked with 24 schools, did over 100 consultations in 6 countries. Out of that emerged over 500 user stories that we consolidated and prioritized, and that basically drove what got built into the first version of Promise 3, which was built really as a prototype for the sake of piloting. We brought it back to the same teachers, the same head teachers, for piloting in those 24 schools. We're able to get great feedback from them. So this is an important lesson, I think, is not building the end-all, be-all tool, but really starting with minimum viable product, getting that into the hands of end users, getting feedback early on, and then feeding that feedback into a redesign and the next phase of development and features and so forth. So we're just now basically between the teal and the green, so coming out of the redesign and about to do training with trainers in 9 countries. So this is something that Kaufman Foundation is really excited about. Obviously, the team at Vera is really excited about. And I'm basically just a talking head, effectively, for this. And it's a massive team of people that have been working on this between architects and developers and designers and so forth. So if we go to the next one. So this is kind of what it looked like. So working in Tajikistan, Afghanistan, India, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, wide range of contexts from urban, peri-urban to very rural settings, and getting kind of a balance of input from teachers, from head teachers, from parents, from students, from other kind of key system actors, so people working in district departments of education or organizations that are working with schools. And so this is, it was really, I think, a very intensive process that we went through over the course of about 2 to 3 months to make sure that we were getting all the voices that we could to help shape what was missing, what the current pain points were, help us understand that, and make sure that we're trying to build out a solution to get a stronger core data management backbone for just answering the simple questions of are kids coming to school, are kids staying at school, are kids learning? What kind of tool can we put into the hands of teachers that will actually help them do their job better and help them strengthen their ability to deliver quality education? That was kind of the ethos with which we went into this. So go to the next one. So this is an example of, we did interviews and focus groups. We also did some facilitated process mapping as part of this. So this is an example process map that came out. And these help to kind of identify weaknesses or pain points. So, one of the things that came out as teachers and head teachers were discussing this is just the question of are kids coming to school and looking at attendance. There's this huge black box. So basically teachers don't have any visibility into what happens to all the data that they're working to collect day in, day out. And this is a huge pain point that just came up time and time again, that there's a lot of data that's being collected. Most of it's being collected on paper. Some of it will get captured in one way or another, but there just isn't that feedback. It's no different than the South Africa experience from before. There were no feedback loops in place, and similarly, we're hearing this from a lot of teachers and head teachers, is that data is kind of collected and it just goes up the kind of upfield or kind of upstream and flows upstream. So lack of feedback loops is a key pain point that came out from the process. To give you a picture of what came from all of these, so we would get, we would do all these consultations. Each school, we'd end up preparing, we had a script that we were working through on focus groups and interviews for head teachers, focus groups with students, focus groups with parents. And so we basically consolidated all of that into these, into these files. This is drilling into one of the schools and getting at the different questions, some questions related to attendance and enrollment, some of the questions related to assessments, and really just understanding and having this that we can go back to 9 months later as we're late in the development process and still come back to, this is the source of truth, right? We're debating in Geneva or wherever we are, we're debating what's the next priority, what are we gonna build in? This is the source of truth. This is what's come from the head teacher. This is what's come from the teacher. This is what's come from the parents and students. So that's been a really key, the key source, I would say, of what's getting built, what's been built. And so Promise 3, basically, some of the guiding principles that came out of the pain points we were seeing is that we needed a solution that was offline first, right? And I think a few tools that are out there kind of think about themselves as being maybe offline enabled or pushing some functionality offline. If you want to get a tool that's going to be able to be used by thousands of schools in rural Central Asia and across Sub-Saharan Africa, it needs to be offline first, which means it needs to be designed with the assumption that all of the functionality needs to be able to work without an assumption, all the functionality needs to work without an assumed internet connection anytime soon, assuming that power and electricity are going to be inconsistent, and so forth. And so that really guided the design principle. Mobile friendly, obviously, so working with the environment that we have and tools that teachers are familiar with or gaining familiarity with. Having a cloud-based tool is really important, so being able to, we can only store so much data on devices, so being able to feed it into a data management backbone that's really robust and flexible allows us, and leveraging Salesforce for doing that allows us to not have to solve everything with the mobile app, right? There's automation needs, there's, when this happens, we want to send a message. Well, Salesforce has been doing that for 20 years. We don't need to reinvent that wheel or re-engineer that wheel, or, we want to do some more robust analysis. Again, Salesforce has been doing that for 20 years. So building on what's already there. But then, importantly, being able to do real-time analysis on the device, completely offline, so being able to get charts that look at, student-teacher ratios like this does for the head teacher, being able to simultaneously look at how, what's our gender breakdown and how does that break down from teachers and students. Other charts around assessments and so forth, but this is just kind of one example of the type of analysis that can be done. Great. So stepping back from this, a couple lessons we've learned, Vera's learned over the years. So first of all, is that tech doesn't solve everything. I think that's a kind of a common message here. There's gaps in what's needed in terms of teacher training in South Africa. Clearly, tech can play a role in solving a lot of problems, but we can't rely on tech to solve everything for us, right? So really, at the end of the day, if we're trying to get healthy data into an institution or into a group of institutions or a system, it's going to come down to these 4 pillars. And actually, if we only get 3 of them right, we're still going to have crap data at the end of the day. And so that's really important to remember. So first, it starts with a strategy, shaping out a logical framework, logic model, making sure we're collecting the right data in the first place. We've identified the indicators that we care about, that we've got appropriate instruments and methods, right? That we're addressing bias, that we're collecting data in a consistent way, not doing it in 30 different ways. That on the bottom left, that you have sufficient capacity. So this was mentioned before, but capacity for me really comes down to the skills on the one hand, but also the time, the time on the other. Time to be able to make use of the data that's being collected in a system or a tool. And then lastly, on strong systems. And I think what we found over the years is that the systems capacity, I think, is a real weak point or an area where we need a lot of work. But systems is also, I think, by and large, we've seen a huge gap there. But I think it's also the space where technology has the most to offer when we think about discipline innovation. So the last slide just gets at what are you going to think about as you're thinking about systems. So this is what we've seen about 7 things over the years that organizations are looking for in a technology platform, and it comes down to really balancing first. What are our needs now? And so this is going to come down to the features of a tool, the user friendliness of a tool, and how secure the tool is, right? Broadly, there's a few other things, but a lot of things fall under what are the features? What can it do? What do I need it to do? And how easy and intuitive is it to use it? Secondly is around our future needs. And this is so important because it completely gets sidelined as a priority. So this is going to break down into how flexible is the tool. In other words, if we need to capture some new type of information 2 years from now, can it do that? Or do we need to go back to the development team to enable it to do that? How interoperable is this tool or is this platform? And then what kind of ecosystem exists around this tool? So these are kind of factors to be thinking about when thinking about what kind of tool would we want to use, or what kind of platform would we want to use. And then lastly, and I think it's important to say it lastly because it's usually like number one on everybody's mind, is the cost. And the other thing about cost is not one-dimensional. Cost has numerous different dimensions. So you want to think about cost in terms of the total cost of ownership of a new tool or technology. You can think about this as an innovation as well. You got to factor in the change management time that's going to go into rolling something out. So broadly, there's going to be a setup cost. Frequently will be license costs to tools, not to all tools, but to some tools. And then there's going to be ongoing maintenance costs. And so there's going to be trade-offs that you have to make in any and all of these. And certain tools, certain platforms are going to perform better on some, worse on others. So it's really about making kind of a balanced, informed decision when you're kind of thinking about what platform or tool you want to use, whether it's a learning management system for teacher training or whether it's a data management system for teachers and head teachers. And so the last slide just gives you like a little decision matrix after this. This just gives you kind of one way you can think about it is, if you're considering a range of tools, frequently, by the way, we see people just go with kind of the I know a guy approach to choosing technology, or the sort of whiz bang approach, like this looks super cool. And you can think about it, like if we look at think about the previous slide, you're making a massive trade-off if you go with whiz bang for what you're going to need 3 years from now, right? With what you think looks really good right now. So if you kind of wait out, you can wait this for your organization or for the folks that you're working with. What do you think is most important with the different tools? But then wait out each different tool and see, how can we, what scores best, and then what's going to be the total cost of ownership of tool A, tool B, tool C. This approach, we think, helps organizations to make a more informed, more objective decision around which technology is going to be best, which platform is going to be best for us to leverage in solving whatever problem it is that we're trying to solve. So hope that helps as a little bit of context and lesson learned.
Great, thank you so much.
So we have about 20 minutes left, and so I think if we can just take briefly like five minutes or so, 5 to 6 minutes, and have you interact with each other on what you kind of presented, I think that would be interesting. And then, I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions and feedback from the other participants as well. And I'm going to turn off the recorder at this point.
But let's try and keep it to 5 so we can take some questions.